Hello and good afternoon to everyone who's attending today's DPOinBOX Academy webinar. And today we will be touching on closing the loop with a third party using DPOinBOX. All right. I know it's a lunchtime. This is hopefully we'll try and wrap it up within the next half an hour, 40 minutes. And in the meantime, if you have any questions coming into this webinar, feel free to put it into the Q&A, and we'll address those questions. We'll address those questions halfway, and if there's some more questions, then we'll take it on later into the end of the webinar, right? So don't worry, it's a lunchtime session. You can, while you have your lunch, you can listen in to this session today, right? Do me a favor, let me know where you are from. Type in the chat section, tell me where you're from, and a very good afternoon. And it's a very bright, hot and sunny day in Malaysia, right? Tell me where you're from, drop a note, say hi, tell me where you're from, right? And for those of you who while we let's just give about maybe about 30 seconds, a minute, put in your message, put in your questions, and we'll start the session in about a minute's time, right? Come on, let me know where you're from and how is the weather in your respective locations. Everyone is busy eating, so no hands to type, right? So it's fine, perfectly fine. Okay, Singapore, very hot weather. Yeah, exactly, right? It's super hot the past few days in Malaysia, and I know Singapore is also very hot. I know we have participants from the Philippines. Hello from Cambodia. Hello, how's the weather in Cambodia? Hopefully it's not as hot as Malaysia and Singapore. Singapore is hot and humid. Makeup is melting. Yeah, all right. So turn on the AC. Make sure the makeup doesn't melt. Philippines is cloudy. All right, that's a nice environment to be in, a cloudy, cool weather while you work. Of course, doesn't help with the mood, right? Okay, Cambodia, I see, very hot. Okay, now exactly, very hot. Okay, so exactly the topic today that we're going to talk about closing the loop with third party. Now, third party has been the very hot topic when we talk about data protection, right? Just like the weather we have here, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, even Vietnam, yeah, it's hot. Third party has been a hot topic. Third party has been a hot subject. Third party has been a cause of a data breach, and that data breach causes the company to be in a hot soup, right? In a hot situation where you have to deal with those data, you have to deal with those respective stakeholders to manage the data breach, right? Okay. So for those of you, maybe you can also tell me what would you like to take away from today's session? Quickly type it down so I can try. I can try and I will put it in a way where we will try and achieve the objective that you are here for, right? So the time now is 12:04. Let's not get in the way, and let's try and finish this hot topic and get back to our work, right? So ladies and gentlemen, today our focus will be on closing the third party loop. Or I would say the closing the loop with third party, as we know that there are many issues relating to third party, and we hope that the sharing today will be able to give you some sort of insights in terms of what to look out for, what to look out for when dealing with third party, right? Now let's go. When we talk about the obligations, today we're going to talk about the obligations of a third party, all right? Third party vendor, or in the case some would say in certain jurisdiction would be the data intermediary. And we're going to touch a bit on a relevant data breach that actually involved a third party, right? So I've got two enforcement cases, which I will share with you in a while. And the last part, which is why you are here, right? How to identify and mitigate the risk in relation to third party. And this will be done through the DPOinBOX, right? So while I present here, you can go ahead and put in your questions if you have any. And if you can also tell me your objective of attending this, and then we'll try and link it back to the objective, right? Now, what are the obligations under the data protection law, right? Now, under the PDPA, under the Singapore PDPA, there are two obligations that are directly involved that are applicable to third-party vendor. The first will be the protection obligation and also the retention. Second one will be the retention obligation. Right. Now, in certain jurisdictions like Malaysia, there isn't any obligations or requirement by the third party to be or to comply, or I would say there isn't any obligation for third party under the PDPA for the Malaysian law. Right? Whereas under certain jurisdictions like even the Thailand and Philippines, right, there are obligations that third party vendors must comply with, right? So in this case, we take the common obligations, protection and retention for a third party to comply with under the PDPA. Now, the next one would be something very interesting, a notification obligation, right? So, and this is something I think more often it's being maybe neglected to a certain way, or maybe not being brought up or not being brought to the attention of a DPO or compliance officers within an organization, right? So now, as a third-party vendor, apart from protection obligation, also retention obligation, you're also required to notify your data users. You are also required to notify your organizations if you have actually experienced a data breach as a third-party vendor in your organization, right? Now, let's dive into the first case study, right? Now, we look into this enforcement case study, which happened in 2019. We see, so now this involves a telco company where 01 is the data user or organization in an organization. The information compromised were effectively the personal addresses of the subscriber and authorized recipients, NRIC number. Now, under the Singapore environment, NRIC number is sensitive in nature, right? Well, under a different jurisdiction, NRIC number is not considered sensitive information, but there are other categories of personal data which is considered sensitive information. So, and it was sent to approximately 292 individuals who were affected by the unauthorized access to the information. Okay. And here we see that, right, so the PDPC note that the protection obligation, all right, under the PDP actually applies to both XL and also 0. Now, 01 being the data user or a organization, we see that that both organizations have failed to make reasonable security arrangements, right, for the protection of personal data. Now, the PDPC expects 01 or 01 had not made itself adequate aware of the XDEL's security processes, right? So what does it mean in this case? Now, XDEL in a way are not aware of the risks in relation to the system, right? Or I would say the web page system. Now, XDEL failure to meet the standard is of course more serious than of 01, right? Given that XDEL was the party in responsible for the web page data breach, right? And in this case, we see that 01, the data user organization was fined $4,000, whereas the data intermediary or the third-party vendor was fined $7,000. Now, in this case, let's look into the issue here, right? So, from one part, an organization, in this case 0, will have to make sure that the XDEL, which is the data intermediary, is secure in a particular base. And now in this case, XDEL actually use the web page system, right? Now subscribers subscribe to the 01's subscription. Now XDEL as a third-party intermediary must ensure that whatever system that they implement or use in their business to support 01, they have to ensure that those, for example, if they a web page system, they must at least have some sort of a penetration test done, or if they have any certification in terms of to ensure that the system or information security part is taken care of, right? Now, in this case, 01 has also is not adequately aware of 𝘂𝘬 security processes. So from 01's perspective, or from a data user, from an organization perspective, what are the things that you can ask for from your data intermediary, right? So the first thing you can ask is, maybe, is there any certification that the organization has actually done, right? So maybe organization have an ISO 27000 certification, right? ISMS, Information Security Management System. Or you can actually ask for things like a penetration test report or a vulnerability assessment report, right? So these are the things that probably these are things that 01 can actually do to ensure that they are aware that the data intermediary 𝘂𝘬 has some sort of level of security in place in terms of their web page system, right? So for the next and in this case, 𝘂𝘬 will also have to make sure that they have done the appropriate risk assessment within their organization, to make sure that in terms of technical aspect of it, in terms of technical, they are properly secure. But most importantly, is more of a administrative control that can be put in place, right? So 0 will need to probably ask for penetration test report, vulnerability assessment report, ensure that in terms of to cover the protection obligation. And when we talk about retention obligation, there must be specific clauses in the contract itself to also say that retention of personal data should not be retained, say maybe beyond the contract duration, right? So these are the kind of things to note when we are dealing with the third-party vendors. Now, for the next case, I would like to take you to just quickly run through this video, which is based on a third party. Now, let's just have a look at this. And
hi, Ben. So sorry, Mas here. We're not hearing any audio.
Hold on. Let me just re-share just a second. Yeah. Let me just. Okay. Can you able to hear?
No, we are not able to. Yeah. Perhaps we could share this video with the attendees later in our email.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Just a second. Let me bring back the presentation. Just give me a second. Okay. Okay. Let's look at the next case, right? Right. So earlier was the case, and you see my screen, right? Okay. Can. Right. So just now was another case which we wanted to view, right? So this is also in relation to a third-party vendor. Now, what I also want to take you through is also the case. Now, the video, what we'll do is, as soon as we finish, we'll send you the link to the video, and you can have a look at. And you can have a look at the link or the video after the session, right? So, but let's look back into the enforcement case of 01 and 𝘂𝘬, right? So one of the things that you can do is also to determine whether, because 01 is actually contracting this part of the work to 𝘂𝘬. And one of the things that 01 can actually do is to actually conduct a DPIA, a data protection impact assessment. Now, the data protection impact assessment, there is also a framework for the data protection impact assessment, and to determine whether or not the 𝘂𝘬 has satisfied whatever requirements that the 01 will have to comply with, right? So let me run through with you a quick step in terms of a DPIA lifecycle. And for those of you in Singapore, this is actually available, and made published by Singapore PDPC, right? So the first phase, let's look at it, where we need to look into assess the need for a DPIA. Now, for organizations who are existingly doing processing within the organization, now if there is any outsource, or if there is any contract processing of personal data being contracted out of Singapore, then this is where you will actually know whether or not you need to make sure there is a need for a DPIA, right? So the second phase is to plan for a DPIA. In a short while, I'll just show you in terms of the DPOinBOX how you can do that, how we can actually conduct DPIA through the DPOinBOX. Then the third one will be the identifying data and also how personal data flows in the organization or in that particular process. The next phase will be the fourth step, will be identifying and assess the data protection risk. Now, in this case, if we look into the earlier case of 𝘠𝘠𝘰𝘵𝘦 and also 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL, in this case, such risks would have definitely been identified in 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL's processes, where 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL and 𝘠𝘠𝘰𝘵 will be able to identify and assess those data protection risks. In this case, would be a technical or system risk, which definitely can be highlighted through the DPIA. Now, the next phase will be creating of an action plan. The action plan will basically look into some of the controls and action items that needs to controls to actually mitigate some of the data protection risks, and also some of the action plans to make sure that things are actually being followed through, right? Whether or not the necessary evidence will need to be surrendered. Those are some of the things that will be into the action plans. On the last one will be implementer and monitoring of the action plan. Okay, so now I will take you through the first would be the DPIA in the DPIA template in DPOinBOX, and then I'll go through some of the reports which you can actually identify or which you can actually look at as a DPO when you are looking at third party. Okay, now. So here's an example. Okay, let me just expand that slightly a little bit bigger. Now, in this case if we look into identify risk, let's look into manage and progress risk. And let's pick example one of the existing project, right? So if you look into the side here, there is also project details. You want to know what are the projects, what are the purposes, what are the processing, what are the data flows, the risk assessment, review, and also the implementation and monitoring, right? So under the project and processes, we look for information like what are the purpose of the project, right? So in this case, if it's outsourcing, then we can actually put those information here. And the most important thing is understanding which are the processes involved in this case, right? In terms of organization outsourcing some of those processes to a third party, and the type of processing of information. Now, when we look into the personal information flow, right? So here then again comes back based on the information needed. That is where the system will generate a report to actually provide recommendations whether or not a DPIA is needed. Right? Now let's look into the second part of it, which is the assessing of the personal data flow within the organization. Now, if you look into the data map guide, we understand that. We look into the data flow summary. We understand that the processes involved, which earlier mentioned into the section 1, there are 3 processes involved, and what are the type of personal data involved in this process or in this DPIA. And in this case, we can see some of the things which is already highlighted. Now, at the end of the day, it's actually to show you a summary of how information flows within the organization in relation to that process. Now, the next part will be risk assessment. We talk about the data protection principles involved in this, right? We look at the risks and controls, documenting of a particular risk. So in this case of 𝘠𝘠𝘰𝘵𝘦, if 𝘠𝘠𝘰𝘗 or in this case of 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL, so if 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL were to be able to then run the risk assessment and identify some of the risks. So here is where the 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL will be able to document the risk and then indicate whether or not the business impact and also the probability, and determine the level of risk that 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL is carrying, right? So if ideally you want to reduce the risk within in relation to that process or that outsourcing part of it, and this is where 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL will be able to to already identify and then manage the risk. Some of the things that 𝘱𝘐𝑒𝑙 can do in terms of evidence is if they are running I would say, if they're running a penetration test report, or if they're running any vulnerability assess report, then all these reports can be uploaded into the system here as an evidence, right? So in the case of any incident that happened, they can always refer back to what has been done. And and that's the risk assessment part. And we talk about review. So when we look into the review, we will look into some of the things that the example 𝘱𝘐𝑒𝑙 has already done based on the assessment that has been done. And when we talk about the implementation, which we look into the follow-up guides and also some of the tasks that's required to be done in the implementation part of it, right? So there's also an audit module to actually go in and audit some of the things that has been implemented to ensure that the controls put in place are effective and also efficient, right? So this is the DPIA part. So I'm going to take you, so before that, there are a couple of things that I would also want to share before I deep dive into the system again. So there are a few things that we want to look at into DPOinBOX. First one would be the disclosure and transfer repository. Right? So remember, one of the obligations that the organization is actually, as a third-party vendor, organization is looking at is actually the protection and also retention obligation. So in this case, we can see whether or not which department that has contracts in place with the outsourced third parties, and whether or not those contracts has been reviewed. Right. Now, the last part will be the third-party suppliers. And most of the time, based on the experience that I've been, organization that actually has onboarded some of the vendors don't actually update those information, right? So whether or not they have stopped using it, or they are still using it, or whether or not they have actually changed vendor. So as a DPO, this is the kind of view and reports that you want to look at. What are the vendors that we have at this point in time in our organization, and whether or not the vendors that we have currently have contracts in place, and are those contracts, or have those contracts been reviewed, right? So for those jurisdiction that has just passed their data protection law, whether or not your contracts with your vendors have the necessary data protection clauses in place, and this is where you'll be able to review those. The next part would be the disclosure and transfer, right? And now we want to know where are we transferring this information to when we talk about the third-party vendors. Now, I want to know what are the countries that we are transferring to, right? Now, simply because we are able to monitor, we are able to know in terms of jurisdiction, the requirements of the jurisdiction. Let's just say, for example, if you are transferring information over to Malaysia, there are certain categories of personal data, sensitive category of personal data, which requires additional care. Right? So understanding where you are transferring your personal data, or transferring your data to the third party, and where the third party's jurisdiction is also important, so that we can ensure that if such jurisdictions have a specific requirements on a specific personal data, we'll be able to put in the necessary controls in place. Now, this is on the data mapping part. So like I mentioned, vendors that we've disclosed to, this is the list that can be updated periodically in the system, in DPOinBOX itself. In vendors that we are using, we have actually terminated the contract. We should be updated in the system, so that one will know who are the existing organizations that we are actually transferring data to, how the data is being transferred, and also which country, so that we can apply the appropriate controls in the respective respective jurisdiction of the vendors receiving those personal data. Right. So this is the case that we are looking at. So if you are transferring information out to EU member countries, or example even Malaysia, Philippines, there are special categories of personal data which requires additional care when protecting those information. Right. Now let's dive back through the DPOinBOX. So in order for us to know, for a DPO to know where can we find such reports, here's where you'll need to look at. First part, the inventory risk. Now, let's look into the data inventory map. So if we scroll down, there are a few parts we want to know. Vendors that you're disclosing to, shared in the slides earlier. Cross-border transfer in terms of where information is being transferred to in relation to the third-party vendor. Right? Now, this is for the data inventory. Now, for the data mapping part, let's look at some of the processes. Now, for those who have entered the processes, let's take one of the process, which is a payroll processing. Right? Let's take this payroll processing in terms. Let's look into the. Let's look into the workflow. Right now, let's look into the reports. Here, where we see the disclosure and transfer reports. Right? The list of disclosure the purpose of the business processes, and then we want to look into the contracts part of it, right? So here's where we know under the say example, you have approximately 18 business processes. Now, three entries is indicated that there isn't hasn't indicated that where the information is being transferred, or there isn't any contract in place. One of the process mentioned that I don't know whether there actually a contract in place. Three entries or three processes in the organization indicates that there isn't a contract is actually not applicable in this. Three entries says that there is no contract in place, and the rest of the 12 entries in the organization, 12 entries or 12 business processes in the organization has contracts that involve a third-party vendor, right? So we can actually see that the number of contracts, what are the status of each contract. So I can easily dive down to each particular processes or department to actually ask whether or not or why weren't there any contracts in place. Right? So for those who had contracts in place, the next thing you want to look into whether or not those contracts are being reviewed. Okay. 7 hasn't indicated whether it's being reviewed. 3 has indicated that they do not know that it's being whether or not it's being reviewed. 3 has not applicable. 3 has indicated that their contract hasn't been reviewed. Now, the 6 processes that involve a vendor has indicated that the contracts have been reviewed, right? And here are the list of the third parties, suppliers, or recipients that the organization actually disclose those information to, right? So, so that is in terms of reports that we are able to see that the DPO is able to view, right? 3 key things: whether or not there's contract in place, and if there's contract, whether contracts are being reviewed, and a third-party supplier. So let's just take an example of one contract which has not been, and there's no contract in place, right? So let's look at the service reception, and let's look at things whether or not we can actually put in. Now, if there isn't any contract review, so here are some of the things that the DPO, the respective division can do, is to actually put in the tasks, such as, we can ask him like get legal. So you can select the respective users, right? Right. Maybe we just select operations. Okay. Contract the party vendor. Right. So we can then schedule when do we want to start and when we want to complete those these tasks, and then we can save it as a task, right? So this particular task. Is where we will need to look into for the respective division to make sure that this has been done or not. So when the contract has been drafted and has been sent to the vendor, here's where you can actually put in the file as evidence, or you can actually put in the reference to your shared drive, right? So example, say the third party with so this is what, and then you can probably enter the URL, whether it's a Google Drive or whether it's a shared drive or SharePoint. You can enter this, and then you can use this as a reference or a evidence part of it. So when the contract has been signed, you just pick instead of no, just go in and select yes, and it will change into it. And then when you go back to your reports, when you go back to your reports under the data mapping workflow, the reports, we'll be able to see under the contracts. So those that have clicked no, and that if those contracts have been actually drafted and sent to third-party vendor, entries will be changed to green, and then here will reduce, here will increase, right? So from 12 that has contract, now you'll have 15 that has contract part of it. Okay. Now let's look into the right. So these are the kind of reports that we will be able to look at. Okay. Now, so now let's look at some of the questions that you actually have. Question has been posted into the Q&A section, right? Okay, let's take one question, right? All right. So one question will be, I would like to know how we can comply with cross-border data transfer with third party, right? So thanks for the question. So a couple of things you need to do. First of all is to make sure that the particular process that handles personal data, that deals with personal data, make sure you have a contract with the third party, right? Whether it's local or whether it's cross-border, whether it's locally in your jurisdiction or it's outside your country, make sure that you always have a contract in place, right? So things like here, right? When I show you a contract, right? So once you have done your data mapping, once you've documented your business processes, then you'll know where are the information is flowing, whether or not there is even to comply with cross-border data transfer with third party, you need to make sure where the information is going, so that you know that, like I mentioned, if you're transferring to Malaysia or Philippines, there are special categories of personal data, and that's where you need to look at in terms of controls, in terms of local controls where the personal data is actually going. Right. So how, another question is, so how might 01 have done better using the tool like DPOinBOX with 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL to have avoided the situation, right? So one of the things 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL can do is actually run through a DPIA, right, to know whether or not the systems that they are actually deploying have a proper information security controls in place. So things like even if a process, let's just say, let's look at an example of a report, right? So when we talk about collection and usage repository, let's just say, example, if one of the processes, the type of data that's being collected, whether or not there is a sensitive data. Now in a 01's case, there is a sensitive data involved. Now there's sensitive data involved, which is NRIC. So here is one of the things that 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL can do. If any sensitive data that has been identified, they can actually look into that particular business process and look on whether or not they can see things like, let's just pick one, right? So there are sensitive personal data involved, right? And what are the things that is being done, right? So here they can actually see that it is encrypted. In this case, the method of transfer, it could be things like even online, even through a web portal. So to know whether there is actually to know whether it's secured or not, this is where the 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL must be able to show some sort of evidence that the at least a penetration test or vulnerability assessment report that has been done, right? So in that case, an example of 𝘂𝑥𝑑AL and also 01, right? So both will need to ensure that whatever processes they have it, if they've actually declared that it's being secured or encrypted, then some sort of evidence such as a penetration test and vulnerability assessment will need to be surrendered so that both parties will be assured in terms of the security being implemented. Right. Now, the next question, let's take, so there is a question of, do we still need a pen test for VWO, so Voluntary Welfare Organization that doesn't have personal data collected from web form, but through Google form instead? I think through Google form, one thing, I think this is just based on my advice. So this is what you can do. If it's collecting through Google Forms, ensure that there is proper access. There's proper access management to those forms, right? So if it's within the organization, Google Form, I'm sure that you will definitely have. You will definitely be able to control the people who are actually accessing to that form, that Google Form stored in your drive. Of course, things like two-FA when using your emails or accessing to Drive. So those are some of the kind of things that you can actually look at. The next question, what's the best practice regarding DPO mailbox for a group of legal entities? One separate mailbox for each entity, or one common for each entity, and the reason for going with either option. Okay, I think perhaps I will probably not sure in terms of what context mailbox. It is looking at no, I can't figure out what you're trying to ask, right? Well, let's look at the next question. Let's look at the next questions. Okay. So in the enforcement case, both organizations had failed to make a reasonable security arrangements for the protection of personal data. 𝘠𝘠𝘠 has not made itself adequate aware, and 𝘱𝘓𝘓 has not implemented reasonable arrangement to prevent unauthorized access. Right. So how might DPOinBOX help a DPO at 𝘠𝘠𝘓 perform a better due diligence in this case, right? So yes, so DPOinBOX will be able to help you. So one part is, on one part, the DPO will need to at least conduct a DPIA, right, for both 𝘱𝘓𝘓 and also 𝘠𝘠𝘓. And there is, in terms of perform better due diligence in this case, yes, we do have templates for DPOs out there. So if you want to get hold of the template, there's two options you can do it. If you can either sign up for a one-to-one demo, and we'll hand you a very basic template for a due diligence. Now, if you subscribe to a DPOinBOX, the enterprise version, we will actually share with you a more comprehensive due diligence checklist or due diligence template for DPOs out there to be able to send it to their third-party vendors. Now, the next question, does DPOinBOX capture the countries where personal data is being transferred to? What are the best practices when my third-party provider is in a country data being transferred that has no privacy law, right? So DPOinBOX does capture the countries, right? I give you an example, right? So under the inventory map, you will be able to see that as in an organization view, I know that where my information is being transferred to, what are the countries that I'm actually transferring the information to, right? And in terms of best practice, if the country that doesn't have data protection law, always make sure that there are many things that you can do. One is to maybe ask. It depends on what are the method of transfer as well. It's always best to ask for if there's any certification, if the receiving country or receiving third-party vendor has any certification in place. Simple certifications like ISMS, ISO 27001. Those are the kind of things that you can actually ask for. Or you can actually ask for, example, if there are any penetration tests done by the receiving party, or if there are any vulnerability tests done by the receiving party, and what are the things that are being done to protect the data that's being received by the third party. Now, the last question, right? So what if the third party is a subscription-based platform where there is no contract? You just sign up and pay the subscription. What are the recommendations to conduct DPIA? I think third party is a subscription-based platform where there is no contract, right? So things like, I think there are no contracts. I'm sure there are contracts, definitely. So end of the day, it's still at your own discretion whether or not you feel it's, if it's for personal, then I think you look at it and see whether it's you want to take up that risk. Well, if it's for organization, definitely there will be contracts in place. Even things like even like Google or Microsoft, I'm sure there are definitely, those are all subscription based, and definitely they won't have some sort of contract in place or any terms and condition that has been, or any terms and condition that definitely will be able to. Definitely there will be some sort of contracts or terms and condition that you will need to comply with. Right? So there's another question for, okay, let's take a last question. Will the company, all right, so will the organization be held liable or being fined if performed and documented the control, right? There are things that the regulators look at when they enforce a particular case. So there are things like mitigating factors and also aggravating factors. So mitigating factors are things that, so in a case where you have done your risk assessment, if you have done your controls, if you've done your proper risk assessment and put in the controls, definitely those could be, right? So don't quote me, could be those mitigating factors when we look into the enforcement, or whether or not the regulators will want to either dish out a fine to you or just give you a warning and ask you to put in those corrective controls. So chances of you getting a fine could be maybe less likely, right? Now, if you have documented and implemented some of the controls in place, and you are still hit by a data breach, then again it comes down to how was it, right? So, and also the question is, there's, in terms of control, there's never enough, but what is enough, right? So this is something that the organization will actually need to look into, how much that they are able to put in place. But how much will you able to put in place also depends on the nature of data that you're actually capturing. If you're collecting a normal personal data and not sensitive data, then your risk is definitely lower. So that's the advice I can give you, right? Any more questions? I think we've pretty much covered all those questions. We've pretty much covered the questions. Okay, so the last question, are there DPIA templates for different ASEAN jurisdiction, right? So the DPIA templates are the same, right? You can apply the same DPIA templates across different jurisdictions. And there are some jurisdictions that will not require certain fields, right? So again, you can adopt that template for any basically any jurisdiction available, right? Now, the last part of it before I let you off for today's webinar, right? So we've covered the data cross-border transfers. We look into the vendors that is being disclosed and also where the location of it, right? So now, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are interested, and if you want to know more in detail in terms of how DPOinBOX will be able to help you, there is a feedback. We want to know your feedback and also your interest of form. So here's what you require. Here's what you can do. You can indicate in the feedback and interest form that you would like to have a one-on-one demo of a DPOinBOX. You can also subscribe to the DPOinBOX and receive a comprehensive vendor due diligence checklist, right? So if you sign up for a one-to-one demo, we will also give you a checklist, but a very basic checklist, sufficient enough for you to do a vendor due diligence. As part of the subscription to the DPOinBOX, we give you a comprehensive checklist, right? We also have a data governance platform approach, right? For those of you in Singapore, and if you would like to know how in detail, right? So basically, this is a course that will actually tell you how DPOinBOX will be able to help you in your organization. So it's a course, it's a 3 days course on a DPOinBOX, right? So to dive deep into some of the functionalities and also the benefits of a DPOinBOX, right? And I also like to take this opportunity to share with you 2 upcoming events. For those of you who will be interested, this might interest you. On June 9th, we have a webinar on navigating the world of AI with strong data governance. So this is an opportunity for those out there who's looking to boost your career with certification, right? And take note of the upcoming event on July 21. It's a masterclass on generative AI and its implication on data protection, right? So this will be in person. I believe that the early bird tickets are still on, so feel free to catch that promotion, right? And last but not least, I would like to invite you to join in the Data Protection Excellence Network community. This is free. Currently, it's free. Now sign up now. You'll be able to also view able to view some of the enforcement cases, their white papers, their events that you like, that may interest you, and most importantly, it's a community where all DPOs out there gather and share their knowledge and also share their thoughts on the happenings on data protection. So we know that to a certain extent, DPOs can be a very lonely job. The network is there to support your DPO community, right? Now, in that case, thank you very much for attending today's DPOinBOX Academy session. I know it's a lunchtime, just nice to quickly have your lunch and listen to data protection stories. But most importantly, we want your feedback. Let us know your feedback. Give us your honest review so that we can look into fine-tuning and further improve or maybe there are certain topics that you would like to hear in the upcoming webinars or upcoming DPOinBOX webinar. Go ahead and fill the feedback form and let us know what you would like to hear next. Now with that, thank you. Hope you had a good lunch. Hope you've enjoyed this session. The next session, do look out for the next information on the next session. I believe my colleague will be conducting the next session, Karthik. Watch out for that DPOinBOX Academy webinar. All right. With that, thank you so much and have a good day ahead. Bye-bye.
For more data protection resources, visit www.dpaxnetwork.org, the Data Protection Excellence Network, and sign up for free as a member to have full access to all content. Do also like and follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn if you found this useful.